In the spring of 1983, Eddie Jackson would come home. In the spring of 1984, Courtney Brown would come home. After both being released from Milan Federal Penitentiary, they both discovered the city that they once ruled was now under a new regime. There was a phenomenon going on in this town. That phenomenon was YBI.
He was dealing with the Columbus cartel. When Cartelitas asked about, he had pretty good influence with the government.
My problem became, I need some motherfuckers to sit at the hookup table and get this shit together, because this shit rolling. This is motherfucking rolling thunder, man. This ain't no motherfucking hustle that you gonna see every day.
We rich. It's on. We can rob. It's on. It's on.
You raided the house on French Road.
So many times.
Say it. Can you say that for us?
So many times.
We never worried about getting caught by the local or state authorities. Our fear was always federal conspiracy case. Not even really a possession case. You weren't gonna catch us with it. If the local cops can catch you, you're not very good. Because the only people the local cops catch are people who are advertising they're doing wrong.
You know, I told him to do a certain thing a certain way. He did it differently than I told him, and he ended up getting killed.
I would never know. You know, I didn't know. I just didn't know. You know, it was because maybe that was the cool thing, you know what I'm saying? Because I could look at him authentic as who he was instead of who his pops was.
But you gotta understand at the level Pop and them was playing at, they wake up in the morning thinking about how to get away with their hustle. They go to bed at night thinking about how to get away with their hustle. They spend all afternoon rehearsing and going over how to get away with their hustle. It's not a hobby.
Y'all don't understand how many seriously twisted, broken people were at the beginning and at the top of the dope game.
You would be thinking that people just are exaggerating or these are street legends. All right, because Kara says something like, in a very nonchalant way, like, Norman need to cut that shit out. He need to go and let them people out them cages.
Let them people out them cages. YBI, of course, is one of the most famous and talked about dope operations in Detroit history. And of course, people have heard about it through the country now, a little bit through BMF. And you probably heard so many stories about it, you might think you heard them all, but you probably haven't really heard the origin story. And there's a lot to it. And there's a couple different origin stories because there's a lot of different people that use the name YBI, Young Boys Incorporated. But I'm going to tell you two deviant, dark stories about two of the people that provided the seed money and maybe even the name and the idea for Young Boys Incorporated. Number one, Mark Marshall. He's an official known. He was one of the early YBIs, one of the Martindale maniacs. Martindale's a street around Joy Road and Dexter. A lot of the guys were from off of originally, and they were like many other neighborhood groups of guys around the city, kind of a gang, kind of selling a little heroin. And in 1970, well, the newspaper article here will show it, 6 maybe, Mark Marshall's father married, and this story is so powerful to me because it goes to the heart of, like, you know, what was going on in, well, I guess America in general, but even more extremely in Black America, of this separating of, like, the people that were going to go into the mainstream and then the other side. So Mark Marshall's father married the heiress to Great Lakes Mutual. Great Lakes Mutual was, so some of the first companies formed by Black people early, you know, late 1800s were mutual insurance, mutual life companies. If you remember, like in Malcolm X's father was run over by a train and the insurance company refused to pay. Like, Black people would pay insurance policies and, you know, sometimes they wouldn't even get paid. And so black people would form. They weren't banks. It's what's called mutual, Great Lakes Mutual. A bunch of people put their money in, and then they'd loaned out to other members. They earn interest. You can get insurance through there. So these people, there was one headquartered in Michigan, Great Lakes Mutual, and Mark Marshall's father married maybe the granddaughter or something of the founder, and they still had. I don't think they were rich, but they had some money. They were living on LaSalle Gardens in a very nice house. That neighborhood over there still has huge, beautiful houses. LaSalle, that's around like 14th and Claremont type area. Mark Marshall's stepmother, the heiress, his father, and the maid, and the dog were all stabbed to death. And Mark Marshall, who was a Wayne State student at the time, maybe 19 or 20, he was the prime suspect. He gets put on trial. They have a mistrial from a hung jury, and there was a lot of bantling about letting certain evidence in. Well, the main evidence they wanted to let in, which the judge ended up not letting in, and Marshall got a second mistrial, and then they didn't retry him. The main evidence not let in was SEMEN, you know what, all over the dead bodies that I don't know the intricacies of the case. The prosecution claimed it matched Mark Marshall. I don't know why it was not let in, but there was a lot of, I think the juries, there might have been on each jury one or two people that didn't want to convict Marshall. And as we found out about like John Gotti and a lot of other, and I know about different criminal cases where if you can get to one juror, you can get a hung jury. And that's a mistrial. And whatever it is that happened, Mark Marshall got 2 mistrials. And of course, there was a life insurance policy, supposedly $80,000 that got issued at maybe 77 after Marshall. I mean, if he's not found to have killed his father and them, he's the beneficiary. $80,000 in 78 is like $400,000 now. That supposedly they went and saw maybe Milwaukee Jack, who was one of the old-time guys connected to Henry Marzette. Milwaukee Jack actually lasted until maybe about 91 or 2. But Milwaukee Jack would pose kind of as a pimp, but he really was a big connection. But he wanted to seem like a pimp, so he'd be less on the police's radar. Anyways, so they get this big load. This is what, and at that same time, there's actually 3 dark stories. At that same time, Raymond Peoples is coming up out of an infamous it was kind of a international cause de celeb, the Livernois 5. In 1975, there was a bar on Livernois, Bob Bolton's bar.
This white honky bar, Heckerwood bar.
Why do you say that?
Because the man, he got a buzzer on there. If you can come down and you see that you're black, you do not get in.
A black teenager who was outside in the parking lot with a screwdriver. So, and the white owner came out and killed him and said he was breaking in cars. Was he breaking in cars? Was he not? Who knows? Even if he was, he can't come out. Not supposed to be able to go outside and kill somebody because they're breaking in cars. And they don't even know I'm not sure if he was even breaking in cars. So anyways, there was all sorts of protests. There was a mini riot.
Last night's unrest was touched off by the fatal shooting of 18-year-old Obi Wynn, a black, by a white tavern owner who accused the youth of trying to steal his car. An angry crowd of several hundred residents responded with a rock-throwing, window-smashing, burning spree through the predominantly black business district of northwest Detroit, despite efforts by Mayor Coleman Young and police officials to restore calm. Detroit, already in the grips of a devastating economic recession, was ripe for violence. Unemployment approaches 25%, more than 125,000 workers. The bar and Andrew Chinarian, the bar owner, now accused of second-degree murder, are both controversial. According to area residents, Shinarian allegedly maintained a white-only policy at the bar.
Coleman Young had only been mayor for a year. He did an excellent job. You guys don't... Detroit would have fell apart worse and faster if Coleman Young did all he could do. Detroit was doomed for a variety of economic and social reasons, but Coleman Young actually slowed it down, at least initially. He came to Livernois and Finkel and stood up on the car. I mean, he kind of talked to people. The riot was that close. During the riot, there was an old Polish baker who had survived the Holocaust, snatched out of a car, beaten to death with a cinder block. 5 people from the neighborhood were put on trial for it, the Livernois 5. Raymond Peebles, the infamous Baby Ray, he was one of them. Now, of course, people came from around the country. I guess there were white people from other countries driving around in the neighborhood trying to find witnesses to help the Livernois 5. It was like a big deal. So they beat it. No one was ever convicted of it.
He was acquitted. But you also know that people were disappearing and didn't come to court.
We already was doing a little something, but out of the love for Raymond, they slid him right in. He had the gift of gab, he had the respect, everybody loved him, right on top.
We had never seen anything like YBI. We had never seen a kid that young, that reserved, that articulate, that smart.
So Raymond Peoples now had this famous reputation. You know, this stuff was on the front page of the paper and etc. So Mark Marshall gets the settlement. Raymond Peoples is out. And I guess you just had this unique confluence of, you get down Dexter towards Joy and Claremont, wooden houses, lower income. And then you got further up Dexter, like where you get into Russell Woods, you still have, to this day, there's nice houses in neighborhoods, like very nice houses. 2 different kind of sets of people. As you can see, Mark Marshall was in college and his father married this kind of rich, semi-rich woman. And then, of course, you had the people like Butch Jones, Kurt McGirt, and others that were from the other way. And but these groups of people came together, and that was the early YBI. So it was funded by this money, probably. I mean, it was 2 mistrials. I don't know, I think I heard Mark Marshall was deceased. I mean, I'm not saying he did it, but I'm just telling you, there were 2 mistrials. There was, prosecution said there was SEM-EN evidence. And Raymond People had been in this famous murder riot thing. So there was violence at the very beginning of it, or with the people that were, in the leadership. Now, something happened between Mark Marshall and Butch Jones. When he got out, Mark Marshall kind of left town early. Okay, so there's that. Now, there's another. Now, this is something you probably never heard about. So, there's a guy named Norman Ugly Man Burton. Norman Burton is some sort of associate, well, not some sort of, was a street associate of one of Courtney Brown's, I guess, he says one of Courtney Brown's family members. Okay, and you had not a connection, Norman Burton, you were a little kid, but your family, your mom's side?
The Robinson side. My mom's Uncle Jay Robinson, rest in peace. My cousin Karen, Jay's daughter, rest in peace.
Who was dangerous.
As tough as any guy out here.
By Detroit standards.
And by Detroit standards. Knew my cousin Karen Robinson.
And she passed she had a bullet in her head for years?
She lived for over 10 years.
With a bullet in her head?
With a bullet in her head from a shootout.
Oh, wow. So she was...
I've seen her shake. She was a thin woman.
That was your aunt, or that was your...
cousin, my first cousin.
That was your mother's cousin?
My mother's uncle's daughter.
Yeah. Your mother's cousin? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So that's your blood. Yeah.
that's my blood.
Yeah, yeah.
My blood for real, for
Yeah,
real.
yeah.
She raised me too.
Oh, okay.
I mean, literally. So Norman would often be over my Uncle Jay's house, who at that time was on San Juan and Curtis,
Very nice neighborhood.
right next to Martha Jean Queen.
Oh, okay.
Martha Jean Queen lived on
Oh, the radio. Yeah.
the radio host at that
And they were messing with your dad, cousin Jay.
cut that of the whole side of
Yeah,
the family.
yeah.
So there's a scene actually in Motown Mafia where Norman's there. There was Joe Weaver, shout out to Joe Weaver, the Weaver family. Thought he heard Norman saying something about
Because it was Norman had your dad come over and talk about getting maybe a brick of heroin or something. When would this have been? Like 75, 4?
but he had a very good relationship, Norman did, despite all the wildness that I would later, when I would grow up, hear that he was into. He was cool with my Uncle Jay.
So your friend, nothing. You weren't told us watch him or nothing like that. No.
Well, I never really had any personal contact. Now, when I did get older and Norman was banging, this is in the 80s when he already got his connect out of New York. Cousin Karen and them were doing a lot of work for him in the Jeffries.
So tell us, okay, what did you know about Norman Burton and YBI and the wild stuff? Or we were trying to piece it together in Joan Rivers, and pretty wild story. And we think we're pretty sure Norman Burton has passed. If not, if you'd like to be interviewed, let us know.
Well, it was in documents in the papers about him, that he had to be respectful to his family, he had a somewhat unusual and bizarre sexual appetite.
There was so...
Oh, shout out to Cousin Keith. I got another cousin, Keith.
Not with a bizarre sexual appetite.
No, but ran with Norman.
We were supposed to call him.
Yes.
And see just as Norman alive, yeah. So Norman Burton was a street operator. He was at that level. He wasn't at the level of Courtney Brown's senior, where they were like the biggest in the city, but he was one of the guys could get a brick or two of heroin, and which is a big deal. A kilo of heroin is a big deal, especially back then. It's worth more than a kilo of cocaine. So he was a mid-level trafficker. Some guys that were in YBI, who were the young guys selling on the street, told me that in the late 70s, he personally stood out on Dexter and Norman Burton, whipped up in a Lamborghini, and dropped them a key of H to whip up, or drop. It was already bagged up. I don't know. Dropped them a big load. Norman Burton had an incident. So in 78, Norman Burton and a guy named Quincy Robinson. So Norman was maybe closer to 30 at this point. Quincy Robinson was about 20. And Timothy Kincaid was maybe 16 or 17. If the name Kincaid rings a bell, it's the younger brother of Benji World Kincaid, the so-called most powerful inmate in the Michigan Department of Corrections in the 70s, 80s, 90s, who was back in. They let him out on the juvenile lifer, but he got caught with a gun. He's back in. Shout out to him. Hope he gets back out, I guess. So Kincaid, Quincy Robinson, and Norman Burton are at a house on, what's one of them streets? Maybe like 6 Mile and Coyle or Sussex or something around over there. And there's some women there, and something went on of someone tried to gank Norman for half a key of H or something. So they murk the women, and the women get murked, let's just say. So they all go on the run, but they end up so the Quincy Robinson guy was a young hitman. He's, according to the police articles, he had 20 murders under his belt at age of 20. Now, was that an exaggeration? Probably, but clearly, he was a killer, and these women were just gunned down in their house. Like it was a ruthless murder. 3 women, I think. Timothy Kincaid, did he get caught and escape, or he just immediately went on the run? I can't remember, but he was in Oakland, California, living, and he was about to get married, and someone, well, it was probably Quincy Robinson, who was in custody, told the police he was there. And, Detroit police came out there to actually let him get married. They caught him and they let him get married real fast. And then they took him back to Michigan to serve his term of natural life with no parole, which Michigan has, a.k.a. the Nat Turner. And, so Quincy Robinson and Timothy Kincaid, are now in prison with Benji Kincaid, who's already been in since 76. He caught a life term for killing a man supposedly during some type of robbery with a prostitute or something. He was only about 16 when he got life. He wasn't much older than Timothy Kincaid. And they were all from the Brewster Projects. All these people from the Brewster Projects were or from that neighborhood around there, like Courtney Brown Sr., Eddie Jackson. They weren't from the projects, but they were from those blocks around there. So that area, the Brewsters and the people around it were the first maybe street kind of power group of a particular neighborhood early. Because they were all very close-knit. And the Jeffries, actually, people don't know, that was still that was kind of considered like the white projects until maybe the late 60s. So the Brewsters had been built as America's first public housing for black people because, believe it or not, they used to have riots over who would get to live in the projects. Sojourner Truth Projects, if you're from Detroit, there on Nevada and John R. in 1942, there was a riot. The whites didn't want any black residents because there was such a demand for public housing. Imagine that, a country so different where people used to have race riots because they wanted to be the ones who lived in the projects. Amazing how things can change. Okay, so there's this power group of Brewster Projects people. You had Papa Dupree, there various people. KK, the Newell brothers, the character Dog from, or Canine from BMF Stars. Of course, I did interviews with his brother, KK. Canine Dog has been dead for quite some years. His brother KK, I did several long pieces with him that have got a lot of views. You've probably seen. Shout out to him. Go check out his channel. He's got a podcast. Quincy Robinson is found dead in a cell. The police claim there's this secret thing called the organization. I kind of put together 2 and 2 of Benji Kincaid is this mastermind that was training people to go out and manipulate, control, he was teaching people his own 48 laws of power. He had guys out on the street putting together teams and crews and doing stuff. Now, he didn't want his little brother Timothy in prison, and he's highly upset. So Quincy Robinson is killed, probably because he snitched. Norman Burton beats the case somehow. I don't know if the evidence played out weird or people think at that time the Recorder's Court was so corrupt. I could imagine the evidence was a little weak on Norman. He paid some money and he gave some info on who knows. I don't know. Norman ends up about 2 years later, in 80 or so, he kills someone else somewhere on the west side of the house. It's funny, that neighborhood was nice, that 6 mile between, Wyoming or Myers all the way past to the Lodge. But everyone that was making some money on, in the Dexter, I think that's where they moved to for, if you couldn't have, only the kingpins could go out to Southfield, but everybody would move to, 6 Mile between Schaefer, Hubble, and that area. So there was a lot of, I don't think it was a bad area, but there's a lot of like gangster crimes that were going on over there early, like even in the 70s. So anyways, Norman gets this other murder in 1980, and he gets convicted. So now he's in Jackson with Benji Kincaid, and they're mortal enemies. They're having knife fights. Benji has like a team of people. They're having knife fights. Norman, though, doesn't care. He's knife fighting with Benji in the chow hall. Like, they're stabbing each other. Like, you know, it's going down. Now, what does Norman have to do with YBI? So YBI is already cracking at this point. Now, remember I said I know some people that were YBI workers that personally Norman dropped something off to them out of a Lambo on Dexter. He would mess around in New York in the late set. You know, when you're trying to make a connect, you know, if you're in Detroit and you're a wholesaler, there was sometimes the Lebanese and the Chaldeans, they had a little trickle of stuff that would come in you could get. But mostly the big people, you getting some Mexican mud from Cali or some people would smuggle it, would go to Thailand and smuggle it right in the Detroit Metro Airport. But New York, going to New York or Chicago was of course, a big thing. So Norman would go to New York. Harlem would have been the only place that that if you read accounts, maybe even a little earlier than Detroit had the teenage, young, 12, 13-year-old drug dealers blanketing the streets in Harlem selling. According to the newspaper and some people in the street, Norman and Steve and Brett, rest in peace, told me Norman supplied some early bag to the YBI workers, and that you heard he brought the idea back.
I won't say his name. He's one of KK's main men, and I out of respect, he's a good guy. It's a real guy. Family with JC Rex, who hustled with popping them. So this guy that I got this from, this was not that long ago, right there on 7 Mile. Him and KK stopped by, and we just chopping up old times. And he's an old school kind of guy, so he's kind of frustrated. Like, man, y'all need to I love what y'all doing, but y'all need to get these stories right. And I'm like, what we get wrong? He like, man, Norman started YBI. He's like, this is quote, I'm literally quote. Were you there? Yeah, you was there when KK and his man came by. Yeah. And he like, man, y'all need to get it right. Norman started YBI. And then he breaks down. He's like, look, man, Norman went out to New York. He got his plug. He saw them guys in New York, had them young kids working, moving their bags, and then he brought that shit with the bag back to Detroit.
This is what the newspaper also did say. And Brett and Steve said, first Lamborghini, they said he came on Dexter or Martindale in a Lambo or Ferrari. It's like this early, it's like 78, and dropped them, some big amount of heroin.
So, and then it got collaborated. Then you told me what, shout out to the Good With Fam, shout out to Five, what the antidote that 5 of them had said. And then when KK Man said that, I was like, now these are real guys.
Norman Burton may have got that idea to do that in New York. And he also somehow, and whatever the hell he was doing, became tight with white female comedian Joan Rivers, of all people. Norman beat that case, but Norman gets another murder case in 80, goes in from 80 to 83. You said Joan Rivers.
Just, again, as we do this content stuff, sitting around, but there are numerous eyewitnesses of Joan Rivers visiting him in Jackson.
So he got a life in 80. So he beat a triple murder 78. He gets life in 80. He's in for 2-3 years. He's having prison wars with Timothy Kincaid's brother. Joan Rivers is visiting him. He's getting appeals. made supposedly with Joan Rivers' money. We don't know what their connection
And
is.
he beat a lot of cases. Say that.
So he gets out from his life no parole, and that must have been that brief time he was doing stuff with your cousin Karen.
In the projects. And he ran, I can say this about the man. For that brief period when he had his hand right, he ran up a bag. The people in this town know the man for getting money.
Some people don't remember Joan Rivers. Some of you might. Here's a picture of her. Joan Rivers was very famous for a long time. She used to I think she was the person that would be at the red carpet at the Oscars, because her thing was she was like that, like Don Rickles, or a certain type of like a old school white humor, or of like they would kind of make fun of everybody. If you were the guest, they would, crack and, make fun of you. She had that kind of harsh type of humor. But Joan Rivers was very famous at this during the 80s. And she would go see Norman Burton in prison. So this is, many people have verified, like, no, she used to be in the visiting room visiting Norman Burton. So Norman and Kincaid are at each other's throat in there, but Norman, he's got money, he gets an appeal. They overturn the case. He gets out by 82, he's back terrorizing the streets. And the end for Norman Burton, well, so there's those, someone told me this stuff about Norman Burton when he was telling me about Norman Burton dropping stuff on Dexter. That was always, he supposedly kept women and boys in a cage sometimes in his house in Southfield, which is and your family members said, so there was talk that he would have people, he would pick up women of the night and maybe other people and keep them locked up in cages.
You would be thinking that people just are exaggerating, or these are street legends, because the Karen says something like, in a very nonchalant way, like, Norman need to cut that shit out. He need to go and let them people out them cages.
Let them people out them cages. So Norman's final...
I'm just saying, that was said, though. That was said.
Man, other street people from here have told me, like, about Norman. I was like...
And the thing in the newspaper with the girl running out of his house, I think he caught a case.
No, that was his final CSC that we don't think he got out of.
Right.
So Norman's timeline, a woman is running down 9 Mile, disrobed, says that she was assayed. Norman gets a case for that. He goes to prison again. Now, once again, he thinks he's going to beat it and get out. He gets to, I think, the Michigan Supreme Court, but 89, they rule against him, and I don't think he ever got out. And if he had been in the street in the 90s, you would have known it.
Yeah.
This goes to what Cavario said at the beginning. Some deviant people at the top of the dope game. It's one thing to sell drugs because you want a better car, or because you're poor, or most people sell drugs are doing drugs. But like becoming a kingpin, like Courtney Brown Sr. certainly is the opposite of deviant. Everybody's not deviant, but a lot were. It's a world that gives you a lot of power. People would degrade themselves, do things for you, and it can easily get out of control. Think about Puffy. Puffy's father came out of that world, Melvin. That world of in the streets. A lot of people like street people in the street life because anything goes. That was the first place homosexuals were accepted. Anyone except, parts of town where white people probably wouldn't go, but if they were going to buy some drugs, like, did you know that Larry Hoover supposedly, and they had to put an edict way back in the day, and like all the Chicago projects, don't attack white people. If they come in there, they're there to buy drugs, they're off limits. So the street culture is accepting of a lot of different kind of people, as long as you spending some money or whatever, or you're, a victim of something, or you're participating in something, or you're part of it, or whatever the case may be. So Norman ends up in 89. A woman is running down the street in Southfield, back when that was still a real high-end suburb, flags down Southfield police. She's been SA'd. The newspaper didn't make any mention of any cages. That part of it might have been apocryphal. Though if you remember, Courtney's, cousin aunt said, Norman, you need to let them people out them cages. So I think he did do that. He maybe just didn't have a cage that night in 1989. He got the CSC conviction, criminal sexual conduct. He tried to get that appealed and all that too. That was denied. Seems like he must have died in prison. I really don't know if nobody's heard of Norman Burton being alive. I'm not sure. He'd be pretty old. Let's see, if he was 30 and 80, 75. I mean, no, he's probably less than 80 years old. So Norman Burton could be alive. I'm really not sure. So this is all information from the horse's mouth and from newspaper articles. So there's some stuff about, so Norman was getting H from New York, where he would have seen young boys selling dope, and that kind of weirdo, kind of deviant. Listen, if you're not from Detroit and you're not used to hearing Young Boys Incorporated and associating all this tough stuff with it, if you just think of that phrase on its own, young boys. First of all, the phrase young boys. Young boys. Young boys.
If you're a disturbed person and you end up being in a position of power
in the streets, it amplifies your ability to do darkness. Because you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's been congressmen convicted of.
And he made his mark. His name's still ringing years later.
Kind of deviant and using children to sell drugs is, again, we got used to it in Detroit, but from the perspective of now an adult, I mean, an older person, it seems pretty bad, pretty awful. And knowing what Norman Burton, other things he got into and were convicted of, way his mind thinks, who knows? And what road Joan Rivers had, that'd be interesting to find out. She's dead too. But yeah, so there's some untold tales of the Young Boys Inc. Al Prophet, America Dope.
If you're removed from that part of it, it's very easy to romanticize the outcome. Get your fresh outfit on, big diamond pinky ring and shit like that, and motherfucker buffing up the chrome and all of that. You could be the most unattractive guy in the world. But if you're adorned in all of the things, all the trappings they dream about, you represent more than just what you look like. You represent all the greatest possibilities in life.
1973. The Detroit Free Press's front page proclaims dope kingpins get away with it. They had names like Jesse James, Pretty Ricky, the Black Greek, and Mr. Clean. 2 of the 12 men listed as Detroit's biggest heroin dealers were next-door neighbors, and in reality, they were the 2 largest heroin dealers in Detroit, dwarfing the other men on the list. Eddie the Fat Man Jackson, charismatic son of a pool hall owner, and his chief lieutenant, Courtney the Field Marshal Brown, a former city bus driver, had built an empire on a par with men like Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas of New York. But theirs was a very different and in many ways more sophisticated operation than Barnes and Lucas's, based on family ties and finesse more than murder and mayhem. They truly were the Motown Mafia, and the saga of Eddie Jackson, Courtney Brown, and their families stretched from the 1960s and into the present day. Starting in 1969, Eddie Jackson had built a tight inner circle of lieutenants like Charles Rudolph, Russell Clayton, Ronald 5-0 Garrett, Black Butch, and his right-hand man, Courtney Brown. All of them had grown up together in Detroit's old Black Bottom and Paradise Valley neighborhoods, forming an unbreakable foundation for their soon-to-come heroin empire.
In a city built on hustle, one man dared to dance with the devil. He was smooth, slick, and dangerous. This ain't no bedtime story. This is blood, bricks, and backstabs. This summer, loyalty is dead, and the streets are talking. The Devil is a Lie, a Big Boss Filmworks original. Narrated by the streets, told by the game, inspired by the truth.